All right. I have a speech defect. Since I was a child, I stuttered. I was much worse when I was younger. But I'm in a profession where you're supposed to talk all the time, so I finally got accustomed to it. It's a free country. If you can't stand my speech defect or my strange voice, I understand you can run screaming from the room. I'm an academic, but have become increasingly concerned, I think, with politics, of how our country is going and how the world is going. And I hope after I've spoken for 40 minutes or so, maybe 50 minutes, professors are programmed to speak for 50 minutes, we can have some Q&A. So start thinking now about the questions you want answered. I think I've discovered an answer to the great question that Adam Smith posed: the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. In a way, not in a way, but this is the central question that economics asks. How do we earn our living? And in particular, and this is a question that Adam couldn't have asked, because he wrote his great book of two, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, in 1776, before growth had happened, before we became rich. But he asked the question how the economy worked and answered it in a way that didn't anticipate the astonishing growth since, say, 1800 in the West and now in the world. And it's that problem of explaining growth that is central, I think, to our understanding of how our economy should work, the current debate that you're hearing about socialism versus capitalism on the left of the Democratic Party. It's that question of how we got rich that is central to our politics and central to our lives. Now, in order to understand this argument of mine, which is a very simple argument, in the end you'll see that's simple to the point of being a simpleton's argument, you have to understand how very great has been the change in the condition of ordinary people, and the poor in particular, since 1800. You'll hear a lot these days of pessimistic talk, of how we've seen our best days, and average is over, and we're entering a period of slow growth, and we in the United States can't expect great things for our future so far as the economy is concerned. I think that's quite false, and it's certainly false if applied to the whole world. This argument I'm going to make, you will see, is optimistic, highly optimistic about the future. Now, if I was wise, I would write a pessimistic book. I have 3 books here that are available for sale. I'm an economist, but I'm also an American. I believe in advertising. There's the books for sale, cheap. They're actually available in spoken books too. I was simply amazed by this. They were read by an excellent actress, all 3 volumes. I think the total is about 60 hours. So if you have a lot of commuting to do, you can read my books through your ears. But if I wanted to sell books, as it's evident that I do, but if I wanted to sell a lot of books, I'd write a pessimistic book. Because for some reason, perhaps you've got some ideas why, people love to hear that the sky is falling. You know, Chicken Little. They love to hear that the end is near. There was a cartoon in the New Yorker a while ago that showed this couple walking down the street, and behind them, walking away now from them, was a bearded prophet with a long gown and a sign saying the end is near. And one of the couples said to the other, "Why, that was Paul Krugman." A great many of my colleagues in economics believe that the end is near and that we're doomed. But I say to you, this belief in doom is chronic, in the West especially. In a way, I think it's part of our Judeo-Muslim Christian heritage. See, I do stutter. An apocalyptic view of history and its end times, as we say in Christianity. But I believe my friends are wrong. And these three books are optimistic arguments. They're arguments that our best days are ahead of us. In 50 or 100 years, the whole world will be rich. We, even in advanced industrial countries like the United States, will be richer still in goods and in spirit. So I do not think the world is coming to an end. Now, as I said, in order to understand this argument, you're going to have to know the following quantitative fact. We economists love to talk about numbers, and here's the number. In 1800, the average American, average occupant of this young republic made and earned and spent about $4 a day in modern prices. Imagine getting along in Colorado Springs on $4 a day. If it was Florida, in a warm climate, it might barely be possible. There are many people in the world who still survive on $4 a day, but very, very badly. They cook over a campfire, their life expectancies are short, they're sick a great deal of the time, they can't read, they can't go to university, they can't hear wonderful speeches from me. The worst of all their deprivations. So $4 a day is where we come from. And if your ancestors like mine are not, well, let's see, what is it? 3/4 of my ancestors don't go back that far to the United States. They're Irish or Norwegian. Came in the 19th century. It was worse there. Norway in 1800 was one of the poorest countries in Europe. Almost as poor as Russia per head. People actually would starve occasionally in Norway. The last large nationwide famine in Europe was in 1866 in Finland. Now the Norwegians and the Finns are among the richest countries in the world. In fact, income per head in Norway is higher than it is now in Sweden, which irritates the Swedes very much. The Swedes have always thought of the Norwegians, not to speak of the Finns, as the country cousins, the poor country cousins, and now they're even higher than in Sweden, their income per head. Their ability to buy real goods and services. So how much can they buy in real goods and services? Well, the income per head of Norway, which was about, now hear this, $2 a day in 1800, in modern prices, as though you were going to try to buy things right now, is $150 a head. In the United States, it's $130 a head. In Sweden, it's about $120, maybe $110 per head. So there's been this remarkable increase, utterly unprecedented. There had been times in history, the time of the good Roman emperors in the 1st and early 2nd century CE, or the Song dynasty in China in the 10th and 11th and 12th century in China, or the Italian Renaissance in the 15th century, or indeed the Industrial Revolution in Britain in the 1700s and early 1800s, in which income would double. Some new set of techniques would be discovered, as in Florentine cloth making in the 14th and 15th century. And for a time, things would get better. And indeed, the most fundamental of these temporary rises was the invention of agriculture. In 9 different places in the world, in the New World and the Old, in the last 10,000, 8,000 years, humans, the human race, there's only one, it's us in this room, the Homo sapiens, discovered how to domesticate plants and animals. And doubtless, for a time, income would go up. When you learn how to cultivate wheat instead of gathering it wild, when you improve the cultivation of corn in Central America or the potato in the Andes, you get a bump up, presumably, in income per head, but on Malthusian grounds, on grounds that when people get more money, they have more children and their income per head goes down. Indeed, in all these episodes, except the last one, income after this efflorescence, after this spurt, went back to the $2, $3, $4 a day. I can't begin to tell you how miserable $2 to $3 to $4 a day is. You must get rid of your sort of Robin Hood movie fantasies about how wonderful it was to live under such circumstances. I know, with Errol Flynn playing Robin Hood and so on, it looks like a merry band of men in the forest hunting the king's deer, and isn't this wonderful? But it was a terrible way to live. The life of man, as Thomas Hobbes said, was solitary, well, not so solitary, nasty, poor, brutish, and short. It's wonderful that we've gotten out of that. Put away your idea that there was a wonderful time. Let's even talk about the wonderful time that many people in this room can remember, I certainly can, the 1950s, which is a source of nostalgia for lots of Americans, both on the left and the right. The 1950s was pretty good if you were a white, middle-class person with a good job on the assembly lines in Detroit. It wasn't so hot, dear, if you were black or Hispanic or Appalachian or a woman or a socialist or gay. It wasn't so nice at all. And in material terms, let's go back to the year before my date of birth, 1941, income per head in the United States, in real terms, was about what it is now in Brazil. And Brazil is in pretty good shape by comparison with its earlier history, but Brazil is not a rich country. And the United States in 1941 was not a rich country either. So we've come a long way, baby, as we used to say in the cigarette ads. And here's how to describe it. Let's talk about $2, $3, $4 a day. I'm not going to bend down. I can't. If I bend down, I won't be able to get up. So let's make this zero, and you can't get along very well if your income is zero. And here we are. We'll call that space on my fingers $2, $3, $4 a day. Here it is. And we'll start back at the beginning of Homo sapiens. It seems now it's about 300,000 years ago. And we go along, and the end of the platform there, I promise not to fall off, is now. And so for tens of hundreds of thousands of years, things went along like this. We were hunter-gatherers. It's deeply significant that we spent so long as hunter-gatherers. From that comes our egalitarianism, and a lot of our good and bad characteristics as Homo sapiens. But here we are, and then let's see now, that's 300,000, so here, I'll go over here. This is the agricultural revolution, as I said, up then down, and then right at the end, about 6 inches from the end, it goes like this, and you have to see this and hear it to understand. It goes whoosh. The sound effects are very important. Whoosh. A factor of 30. 3,000%. I was embarrassed. I gave a talk at the Department of Cultural Anthropology at the University of Cambridge this fall. And these were anthropologists, not economists. And I said to them, factor of 30 times, whereas the usual increase was a factor of 2, 100%. Modern economic growth, this Great Enrichment, as I call it, was a factor of 30. That is 3,000%. And a very distinguished cultural anthropologist said, well, you know, I've studied these matters, and I agree with your factor of 30. But, you know, 3,000% is too high. Now, he's a nice guy, and he's very intelligent and a very good scholar. He's a scientist, very good anthropologist. So I didn't say to him, go back to your 4th grade arithmetic, dear. But okay, 3,000%. Why? Perché? Pourquoi? Warum? Why? Now, there are 2 basic lines of thought for explaining why this happened. There's left and there's right. There's socialist or left wing, and there's conservative. The conservative argument, let's start with that, is that virtuous rich people saved a lot of money, started saving a lot of money in the 1700s in Britain. For some reason, they suddenly started to save money that apparently they hadn't saved before, and invested it in cotton mills. And that made us rich. Now, I've spoken it as kind of a parody, and that's right, because it is a kind of a crazy idea. That suddenly people started to save, and the accumulation of capital made us rich. Now, the very word capitalism, which I really don't like, embodies this idea. Capitalism, well, gee, the way we get rich is by building halls like this and having lots of chairs and audiovisual equipment, and that makes us rich. What's the problem here? Accumulation of capital makes us rich, is the idea. And this conviction is deeply embodied in economics since Adam Smith. It's one of the few mistakes that the sainted Adam made. But it's a very important mistake. My friend Bill Easterly, an economist who worked for the World Bank for a long time, calls it capital fundamentalism. That the way to make a country rich, like Ghana, is to pour foreign aid into it. Give Ghana lots of dams and big lakes and roads, and then it'll get rich, because that's what we do. We have dams and roads, and we're rich, so it must be that that's how you do it. And it didn't work in Ghana, and it hasn't worked anywhere. Sheer investment doesn't work. There are two arguments against this capital fundamentalism argument. One is historical. It's not true that suddenly people started to save in the 1700s. They had always saved. They had always accumulated. Right back to the caves, Acheulean hand axes are found by the hundreds in archaeological sites of our ancestors in the caves in Africa. By the way, everyone here is an African. Most of you your ancestors came out of Africa and turned left, but anyway, we're all Africans, and in those sites, you find accumulation, evidence of accumulation. If you don't like that, take a look at the great civilizations, the Incas, or the Mayans, or the Egyptians, or the Chinese, or the Mesopotamians, or the. They built the Grand Canal in China, which, by the way, I'm going to see this in June. My sister and I are going to go there and have a look at it, which was the longest canal in the world until really the 19th century. They built, the Chinese did, of course, the Great Wall. You've all heard of that. And indeed, ordinary peasants had to save a great deal. In Europe especially, they had to, because yields per unit of seed in Europe were very small. 4, 5. You put a grain of wheat into the ground in, say, the fall or the spring, depending on whether it's winter or spring wheat. You wait. You abstain from consuming it until next August at the earliest. And then you'll get 4 times more than you put in. But that means you have to save a quarter of your crop. So think of it. Think of the man sowing broadcast, as they called it, throwing his children's breakfast on the ground. His children are back in the hovel crying for hunger, but he must throw the seed away, because that's the only chance that next year they'll have anything to eat. So there's this tremendous savings rate of the poor. So it can't be that savings rates and this kind of virtuous capitalism idea is what did it. And then there's the economics of it, which is also terribly implausible. Look, suppose the university, it's now got this nice hall, it's very nice, and it decides to build another one identical to it next door. Is the new hall going to be worth as much as this one hall is? Will it earn in educational value or public enlightenment the same amount that this hall does, this one hall? Well, no, because now you've got 2 halls instead of 1. And the second hall will not be used as much. If Paul Krugman comes, you'll have other people in the other hall seeing him on TV because he's very popular, and that'll be nice, but that's its only use. If you don't get that, suppose you did a third hall identical to this one, or a fourth or a fifth. Obviously, there are diminishing returns to halls. There are diminishing returns to automobiles. There are diminishing returns, I hate to say it because I'm in the industry, to education. Not everyone should get a PhD. Imagine if everyone in the United States had a PhD. This would be a very low productivity thing to do. So, on both historical and economic grounds, the conservative argument, the right-wing argument, doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. It certainly doesn't make any sense if you need to get a factor of 30. You can make a case of doubling, and without any change in technology, you're just going to add new rooms, new halls, and new roads that are built the same way the old roads, and you're just going to keep doing it till the cows come home or fail to come home. And that's it. That's all you're going to do. It's obvious you can't get to 30. You can't get 3,000. Stop fooling yourself. Yet, this, as I said, is the way economists think about, the way, shall we say, most American economists think about economic growth. It's obviously mistaken. I make this argument in the second of these wonderful books here. I mentioned that they're on sale over there at Amazon.com if you forget. And they're wonderful books. So that's the right wing. Now the left wing. The left wing says, I was once a Marxist myself, so I'm very familiar with these arguments, says that the way the world got rich is by exploiting people, by stealing from people. And you say, you bet. Those bosses, they stole from the workers. Or those Europeans, they stole from the third world. Or those Americans, they stole from the Indians, that's quite clear. They stole from the slaves, from the African American slaves. And that's what made them rich. The argument here is that instead of, the conservative argument is that there's sort of an original grace of saving, whereas the so-called capitalism, whereas the left-wing view is that there's an original sin in capitalism, that it comes from exploitation. Now, on its face, this argument, just like the first conservative argument, has the same problems. A historical problem and an economic problem. The historical problem is that exploitation is nothing new. Africa was very largely filled with slave societies. So was the ancient Mediterranean. So was South Asia. Come on, slavery is very common. If slavery is supposed to be it, if all you need to do is enslave a bunch of people, and then you get your income goes up by a factor of 30, wait, something is wrong. The glorious and admirable words in Lincoln's second inaugural, where he says, if it is decreed by God that this terrible war shall go on until all the wealth accumulated by the bondsman's toil since the early 17th century shall be paid back, the laws of God are always just. And it's inscribed on the Lincoln Memorial, and you weep when you see it. It's a wonderful speech, but it's economically wrong. The United States is not rich because of slavery. And indeed, The comparable argument in Britain is that Britain is rich, as it certainly is, because of exploiting its own working class. And this is very strange because, as I said, there's historically working classes have been exploited, if that's what you think, forever. If you think that employment is exploitation, which is the core idea on the left, that wage slavery is a phrase that makes sense. My friends on the left and me once, when I was a Marxist, believed this. If you believe that, then you can feature this claim that exploitation, well, at least makes the bosses rich, but then move to the economics. Since there have been exploitation all these centuries, nothing happened to the way of the wheat. But now we're suddenly, for some reason, things in the 19th century, exploitations in the 19th century, say imperialism, late imperialism in the late 19th century, had this wonderful effect of increasing income. Well, why not earlier? And then again, the economics is wrong. Because consider, suppose we cut the room in half and we enslave everyone on this side of the room to those people on the other side. Those are the bosses. You people are the slaves. Is this going to result in 30 times increase of income for the whole room? Because that's what happened. The poor have been the main beneficiaries of this factor of 30. In 1800, if you were rich, you had a diamond bracelet and a nice chateau and a bunch of servants. But if you were poor in 1800, you had nothing. Now, if you're poor in a country like the United States or Sweden or Japan, you have a sufficiency. It's not enough. I agree there's still a problem of the poor, and I have proposals to help the poor, but my proposals don't include state-sponsored socialism, because that hasn't worked. It doesn't work in Venezuela right now, or in Cuba, or in anywhere it's been tried. So the economics is no good. In fact, notice that the left-wing argument actually depends on the right-wing argument, because it says, well, the bosses steal surplus value from you, the workers, and reinvest it. And then we're back to the conservative view, namely that reinvesting capital is what made us rich, and it can't work. Okay, dear, what's the explanation? Well, the explanation is rather obvious. It's technology. It's technology, stupid. It's improving how we do things. Not just piling up more BAs, more bricks, but thinking of better ways to use them. Better buildings to build, better ways to use human capital, as we economists call it. That's what made us rich. Now, to believe this, you need to buy those books and put them by your bed and study them every night as though it was the Torah or the epistles of Paul or something. But let me just give a few examples. Now, the obvious cases are real technology, like those cameras over there, or this amazing microphone, which, by the way, is one of our older electronic technologies. It usually fails. So far, it hasn't. That's good. And they're wonderful technologies. Henry David Thoreau, when the telegraph was strung from Maine to Texas in the 1840s, that was the earliest communications technology, electronic communications technology we had. Someone said to Henry, now Maine can speak to Texas. To which he said, but does Maine have anything to say to Texas? So there's been these accumulation of inventions like that. The electric light, which, by the way, let's get clear. Edison didn't invent the electric light. The theory of the electric light was a commonplace in the 19th century among a great many technologists and scientists. It's just that he got the filament right. Unlike Benjamin Franklin, who gave away all his inventions, Edison carefully patented every invention he made. Okay, so we have all these inventions, and that's good. Steam engine, James Watt patented the separate condenser and made a ton of money out of it, and stopped progress in steam technology for about 30 years. But okay, so we have all these things, wonderful things. Those curtains, which you have all around this room here, are impossible in 1800. I mean, it would take, I don't know, the Bayeux tapestries would be a couple of yards of that cloth. And the wood that you have on the floor would be impossibly expensive in 1800. The glass on the doors. Has it never occurred to you how much glass we've got in a modern building that you push against, we use as doors? You couldn't do that in 1940, as recently as 1940. You push against a glass door with panes that large in 1940, and you die, or you get cut up very badly, right? So there are those, but there are also sheer organizational inventions. One of my favorite ones is containerization, invented in 1956 by a man named Malcolm, what was his last name? Malcolm McLean, a poor boy who hadn't enough money to go to college, so he started a trucking firm carrying tobacco. And then he had the idea, well, now let's make a box of standardized size, make it of corrugated steel. We now had cheap steel from the middle of the 19th century on. And then we can pile the boxes on top of each other and put them on ships. Containerization has revolutionized the world. It's made for the new globalization, the globalization of our age, which is even more radical than the globalization that happened in the late 19th century. The modern university, such as this very university, was invented in 1810 by von Humboldt in the University of Berlin. Now wait, there are older universities. The very idea of a university is an Arabic invention that then was copied by the Italians and the French. Well, that's good, but those were trade schools. What von Humboldt invented was a place where you could come to be taught that also did research. And that the students, especially the graduate students, but even the undergraduates, would be involved in research, in advancing knowledge. So Germany, for example, in the 19th century, developed an amazing academic chemistry structure and led the world in chemistry. So organization by itself, even without technique, and here's a crucial point, even without science, makes us rich as long as it takes place. You don't have to be an atomic scientist to invent containerization, right? You had to know that there was an atmosphere and it had weight to invent modern steam engines. But most high science, really until around 1900, had very little to do with economic growth. This is a quarrel I have with my dear friend Joe Mokir, another economic historian. But all right. So here I'm coming to the end. I'm coming to the punchline. But why, Deirdre, these new ideas? Why is there a sudden explosion of ingenuity, starting in northwestern Europe in particular? Holland, to start with, in the 17th century, England, Scotland, then the North American colonies in the 18th century, and then France and Germany and the rest of the world in the 19th and 20th and 21st century. Why? Why a sudden burst of ingenuity, of invention, organizational, technical, scientific? What's going on? Not investment, not exploitation. What then? I say, and this is the third of these wonderful books, I say that it's because of liberty. It's because we became freer. Not that we're perfectly free now. Not that there are no people oppressed in the world. There are. But the idea that was given birth by advanced intellectuals, Voltaire, Mary Wollstonecraft, Tom Paine, Thomas Jefferson, that owner of slaves, Adam Smith. These people started talking, as Adam Smith said, that what we needed, and here's a sentence from him, we need the liberal plan of equality, liberty, and justice. By which he means, if you read the text, equality of social standing, dignity. I take it that everyone in this room, we being modern American Democrats with a small d, believes in the equal dignity of every other soul in this room. I hope you do. If you don't, I want to preach to you. I want to convert you to this democratic view. 100 years before all this, a man named Richard Rumbold was hung by James II's judges. This is 1685. And under English law, he had the right of a speech from the scaffold before they opened the door. And he said in his speech, I think there is no man born of God who comes into the world with a saddle on his back and neither any booted and spurred to ride him. This is 1685. I have no doubt that the audience gathered to watch it. It was sort of the reality TV of the age, was watching executions. I have no doubt that they laughed. Because in 1685, this was an absurd idea. The idea that a duchess and a plowman had equal dignity, that one was not born with a saddle on his back and the other booted and spurred to ride him, was an absurdity. Agricultural societies were hierarchical to their core. And then, by 100 years later, these advanced intellectuals were saying it in northwestern Europe. Another 100 years, it had become a commonplace. Still another 100 years, our time and beyond, even the worst tyrannies in the world claimed it, claimed this basic equality. Smith meant by liberty in this sentence, the liberty to start a business or to move to a new place of work. He was particularly outraged by the restrictions on the mobility of laborers. They should be able to move, said he, to where they can earn money for their families. And equality before the law. So there's this deep equality. And I want you to stop calling liberals in the United States liberals. My friends, the liberals, as we say in the United States, are wonderful people, and I'm sure there are lots of them here in this room. But they should stop using the word liberal to describe themselves, because they're not liberal. They're 50% socialists or 30% socialists, depending on the country where they live. They want not to allow people the dignity and liberty of a free society, but they want people to have masters. The Food and Drug Administration, the grossly exaggerated executive power of the president, whatever. That's what they want. And that's socialism, whether of the right in the form of fascism or of the left in the form of communism. The real liberals are the heirs of Adam Smith. It's actually quite tiresome. I have to cross myself every time I mention him. When I'm in Russia, as I occasionally am, I have to cross him the other way. The real liberals want a society in which there are no slaves, in which nobody has a master, in which you're free to do up to the point of someone else's nose whatever you want to do. Now, I'm not an anarchist. I believe that these people in Oregon and Connecticut who are refusing to inoculate their children against measles should be compelled at the point of a gun, if necessary, to have their children inoculated. I just think it's crazy to have children wandering around infecting other children with measles, or adults, which is worse. So there's a role for the government. I don't deny that. But in the modern world, in the recent world, in the last half century or so, or more like the last 100 years, the role of the government has increased and increased and increased. So here's what I'm saying. And here's the link between liberalism, as I'm defining it, and as the world does outside the United States, and economic growth. Liberalism lets people have a go, as the English say. The English of England have a go. They're very sports-minded in England. They've invented most modern sports. And they say, allow people to have a go, have their chance to score a goal or to their side to play in innings at cricket. And more people were allowed to have a go. And it turns out, it was an experiment we performed, especially in the United States, as we gradually liberated first poor white men, then slaves, then women. It turns out that when people are left alone, helped when necessary, I regard myself as a Christian liberal. I recognize an obligation to the poor. I'm an Episcopalian, Catholic light, the frozen chosen. But I think that the society should be a society of free people, not slaves. That's what I believe. And I think it's what's been successful in the economy. And it's more than in the economy. It's been successful, I claim, in spiritual and cultural terms. I have 100 examples of this, but one of hundreds is that this is the great age of the novel. The best novels ever written are being written right now. Now, I'm a student of these matters to some degree, and I admire Jane Austen extravagantly, but there are 20 Jane Austens writing right now. And that's a consequence of commercially tested betterment, as I call it, instead of capitalism. allowing people to have a go. One more final point. You hear a good deal. I was speaking to someone before the talk about the Chinese model. And there's no doubt about it. Since 1978, the Chinese economy has grown extraordinarily fast, 7 to 10% per year per capita, in which case income doubles every 10 or 7 years. Doubles. So in 14 years, it's quadrupled. Quadrupling income solves a lot of social problems in a hurry. Now India is growing that fast. People speak of the Chinese model. They think, well, there must be some special, I don't know, way of organizing an economy that the Chinese have. They've got some trick that they do, that the government does, that the Chinese Communist Party does. That's what it is. And that's wrong. That's incorrect. What works in China is the liberal parts of the economy. The illiberal parts, the parts that aren't a matter of voluntary trade, but a matter of compulsion, work exceptionally badly. Chinese government-owned enterprises are notorious for their bad management and their stupidity. They reduce Chinese national income. And the great projects that you hear about, like this crazy project they have to build a railway to Europe. That's from, I was once a transportation economist, and believe me, it's stupid. That's my complicated economic analysis of it. And the high-speed rail, which they have now all over China. China has more high-speed rail, 200 miles an hour. I've been on them. It's amazing. 200 miles an hour on viaducts. They're 40 or 50 feet above the ground. Whiz! That's stupid too. They have them all over China. They have more high-speed rail than all the rest of the world combined. So it's the governmental part, the compulsory part, the involuntary part that's working badly in China. And the liberal part works well. And an obvious proof of this is India, which is now growing faster than China is per capita per year. India is a free country, thank God. It's crazy though India is, it's a democracy, and they play cricket very well. I commend them for this. And they're growing fast because they're letting people have a go. Not because the government is wisely doing 5-year plans, the sort that I was taught back in the 60s at Harvard, but they're letting people open shops, start businesses, have a go, invent new things. And that's one of the reasons I'm so optimistic, that places like China and India, when they let people alone, evoke the natural creativity of free human beings. There's a cartoon I saw the other day, which I'm going to start attaching to all my mail, that irritating habit, all my email, and it shows it's a cartoon of the world, the globe, and over it is this giant man who's seizing control of the world. The caption is, "I'm a libertarian, and I'm taking over the world in order to leave you alone." And that's my theme. That the best society of science, art, music, painting, and the economy is leaving people alone, helping them in a crisis. That's the Christian part. And that's the society I want us to get back to. I want us to stop thinking that every problem we have can be solved by more compulsion. Thank you very much. So I'll be glad to entertain, as we say, it's a strange expression, entertain any questions, comments that you have. Have we got another?
We have 2 microphones coming up.
Oh, good. Let's get those microphones. So put your hands up and wait for the microphone. And I have a rule. I'll take questions or comments from 2 men, and the third person has to be a woman.
A woman, yes.
Yes!
We just left Chicago
Oh, yeah.
before the pension funds go dry. Anyway,
Yeah, do quickly.
when you talk about technology being the key,
Yeah.
how about Julian Simon's thought, which is man's intelligence?
Well, but
Underneath
that,
the technology, which is the resource.
he's exactly right. I greatly admire this man who died too young. His name is Simon. And he wrote against the resource scarcity school, of which Paul Ehrlich was the leading example. You remember, the older people here remember Paul Ehrlich's book, which said by now civilization would be dead, we'd all be killing each other, starving, India would starve. Meanwhile, India became a grain exporter, and we didn't starve. Income per head is going up in the world and has been for 40 years by 2% a year in real terms. Doesn't sound like much, but really is quite good. No, he's absolutely right. It's ideas, as I say in the title of my 3rd book here, it's ideas, not capital or institutions, that made the modern world. It's the creativity of humans. Resources are not what we need. If resources were what made us rich, Russia and Congo would be the richest countries in the world. Need I point out that they are not? Hong Kong, which has no resources except a deep harbor, would be the poorest country in the world. So there's something terribly wrong with the resource scarcity argument. Yeah, read Simon's book, The Ultimate Resource, which, as you say, is human creativity. We let people free and they use it.
Hello.
Hello.
I'll admit I'm a bit of a pessimist, but I probably won't sell as many books as you. But
No, on the contrary. If you're a pessimist, write it. You'll sell a ton.
All right, my question is, you said that instead of, say, exploitation, it's technology which increases wealth.
Yeah.
But isn't it possible that it could very well be both? Like in the South during the Civil War, we had the cotton gin, which certainly increased the wealth, but slavery did also. So
Well, I have to admit that if I could enslave you all, it would be advantageous to me. I have to agree with that. I could set you to work on my next book, for example. In fact, would you like to volunteer for this? I'm glad to do it. But no, it's the cotton gin was important, but here's something that was more important, by the way. Not so much slavery as selective breeding of cotton plants. From 1820 to 1860, the productivity of cotton plants, right, the little plant in the ground, increased by a factor of 4. You put a seed in, you get 4 times more than you did in 1820. So that was one of the things that made slavery continue to be profitable. The only way we were going to kill slavery is either by buying the slaves and setting them free, or by a war. Exploitation is really limited in how much it can do. If we cut the room in half and make this side slaves, and which one was it, and those people free, or the other way around, the income of this side, the free side, will be doubled. Hey, pretty good, huh? But wait a second. We're trying to explain a factor of 30, not a factor of doubling. So clearly this technological, institutional cleverness that's been harnessed is crucial.
Hi. I wonder if you comment on, I hope I get this right, MMT, modern monetary theory, this whole theory being talked about, particularly on the left, of funding all these programs. I wonder if you had a comment on that.
Well, I think it's insanity. There's a deep feeling on the left that there's always excess capacity, that there's always unemployed resources, and that all you need to do is give people money, and then there'll be a multiplier effect, and everyone will get much better off. And that's the basis of that argument. And it's wrong. Now, I was also a Keynesian. When I was in college, Harvard College, that's what was on offer. I've been everything. I've been a man. I've been a Marxist. I've been a Keynesian. I've been a social engineer. I've been everything you can name, and all those other things didn't work out. But the fact is that in the short run, despite Simon's very correct claim about the long run, in the short run there are constraints. There are constraints of resources. So we can't just magically print money, give people, and expect a multiplier. In fact, the technical examinations of this multiplier effect have found that it's basically zero. There's no multiplier effect. As I was taught at Harvard College, oh yeah, it's big, it's 4 or 3 or something like that. No, nothing like it. So no, I think this is another free lunch promise that isn't sensible.
Let me say just a little bit about slavery in a rather different sense. The 2,000 calorie diet that we all eat every day amounts to an amount of energy equivalent to the burning of a 100-watt light bulb. In other words, we are consumers of 100 watts of food, so to speak. Now, if you take the total energy that is used in the United States every year and divide it amongst all the people, it turns out that the average per capita consumption of energy from coal, oil, natural gas, nukes, everything, is 11 kilowatts. So that is the equivalent of 110 slaves working for us full
right.
time.
That's exactly right.
Thank you.
My friend Matt Ridley, an English journalist and Viscount, by the way, he's in the House of Lords. He makes this point that if you don't like fossil fuels, maybe you'll prefer slaves. Huh? That these are our mechanical slaves. Now, I'm not making a case for fossil fuels, which I know is a sensitive issue in Colorado. But yes, I agree that now Matho makes a mistake. He says, yes, it's the invention of the use of fossil fuels, coal in particular, and then oil, which was the key to the modern world. And he's wrong. I've got a chapter in one of these books that says not even coal. It's the case that steamboats on the western rivers in the United States operated on wood, not on coal, for decades after the Civil War and before. It's the case that in Pennsylvania, iron was made with charcoal, not with coke from coal, well into the 19th century. So coal's not essential. It's not some magic thing you have coal, because after all, the Romans had coal, and in great quantities, the Chinese had coal. The Chinese were able to do porcelain partly because of the high heats they could get from coal in the firing. I want to hear from some more women. Well, okay, I'll accept them. Oh, there's one.
I was actually
Hold it really close.
Really
As though
close.
it's rock music.
It is rock music.
Good.
Does that sound right? Okay. I was just wondering, you had you had said, obviously we need some kind of like cooperation, and then of course, obviously to help the poor, there's that Christian piece that you're
Yes.
referring to. Do you think that it's possible or likely that perhaps your optimism may be a little bit too optimistic in the kind of estimation that we're a little bit more secular now than we have been?
Well, we're more secular, I guess, although it depends on which we you're talking about. I mean, mainline Protestants and now Catholics are declining in the United States. Even Baptists have started to decline. But in Africa and South America, no, it's going up like mad, especially on the Protestant evangelical front. So I'm not what's called in religious studies the secularization hypothesis, that once you get enlightened, you're gonna put aside all this foolishness about God and Jesus. I have friends, not friends really, but acquaintances who are these new atheists, and that's what they say. Oh yeah, any intelligent person, actually on TV, Bill Maher is a good example of this. He just can't resist sneering at religion every chance he gets. Saw him a couple of nights ago doing it, and I think he's silly about it. But the desire to help other people is not intimately hitched to being a Christian. Do I have to point out to people that Christians have done a lot of damage to other people in history, and that being a Christian doesn't automatically make you a nice person? It makes you talk about it a lot, but it doesn't necessarily make you exercise love as you should. But I think there's a lot of evidence of an increasingly cosmopolitan sensibility in the world, regardless of the fate of theism. This is actually a point that lots of other people make, that we should be more optimistic.
It seems to me that the debates between right and left on economic questions these days focus on two different questions. The right focuses on growing the economy and how we improve the absolute amount of wealth we have.
Yeah.
And the left tends to focus on how that wealth is distributed.
Yeah.
And so we hear a lot about the question of income inequality and how, it's great that we're all becoming richer, but the problem is that wealth is becoming more concentrated at the top.
Which is not true.
So yes, please address this.
Well,
debate.
I've addressed it at some length. If you go to my webpage, DeirdreMcCloskey.org, you can find an essay of mine, a 50-page review of Piketty's, Thomas Piketty's book, where I approach the book with great respect. It's a serious project. He's not a bad man. But as is often the case in science, he's mistaken. And in particular, if you look at the Gini coefficient, the one measure of equality or inequality, if you do it correctly, which is person by person over the world, the Gini coefficient has been improving for 30 years, radically improving. The poor are coming out of poverty. In 1960, world population of about 50 billion people, 4 billion of the people were in desperate poverty, this $2 or $3 a day stuff I'm talking about. Now, there are still people in desperate poverty, and we must do something about that. But it's 1 billion out of 7. So the absolute number of poor people in the world has declined by half, while the population has increased by about 50%. So it's simply not true that inequality is increasing. It is certainly not true, and I argue this in this long essay, that commercially tested betterment has some tendency towards inequality. That's quite false. And as I said before, earlier on, the poor are the main beneficiaries of this increase in the average. You know, okay, I get another diamond bracelet if I'm Lillian Betancourt, the heiress to the L'Oreal fortune, who I think she died, but was a terrible person, a complete idiot. She set up a charitable foundation. She gave to the charitable foundation 1.5% of her wealth. 1.5%. Andrew Carnegie gave 100% of his wealth. So, you know, she's a jerk. And I have no interest in her getting more yachts. That's not interesting to me. But what I am interested in is the condition of the wretched of the earth. And that is saved. The only correct isn't the word, the only successful welfare policy for poor people has been economic growth. Redistribution doesn't work. Now, by the way, I've said this in a very firm way, but I'm not against, one thing I'm really not against is Medicare, because I'm the beneficiary of it. I had a $5,000 procedure to my eyes 2 days ago. And you people under 65, thank you very much. So that is, but to be more serious, I'm not against income subsidies. I'm not against helping people out with money. I'm someone who housed in my own home 2 homeless people for 5.5 years. If I ever debate Piketty, the BBC tried to organize such a debate, but why should he debate an obscure Midwestern professor? But if I ever do, I'm going to ask him how he spent the royalties on his book. Did he give them to the poor? I doubt it. There's a woman. Eke. You're the one I want to talk. You had your hand up, but you have to have the microphone, or you'll have a small voice.
I didn't actually have my hand up, but
Oh,
that's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
No,
I'm
it's okay
sorry.
because I do.
She
have
was
a
scratching her
question.
head or something.
I do have a question
Go
on
ahead.
Andrew Yang and his freedom dividend, and your thoughts on that and displaced AI people.
No, I have an essay on that too. I have an essay I did for Reason Magazine, which on technological unemployment. And you got to stop worrying about technological unemployment and AI and the singularity and all that crazy stuff. Look, a shovel is a robot. Look at the microphone. Look at it. Look at this. This is a robot. It's AI. Books are artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is all around us. Governing devices in your automobile is artificial intelligence. We've been having artificial intelligence and robots since the beginning of time. And don't be frightened by the engineers who don't think in these historical terms. Say, oh, it's new, it's new, it's new. No, it's not. It's old, it's old, it's old. Milton Friedman was shown in 1988 a construction site run by the Communist Party where all the workers had shovels. And Milton said, why don't they have steam shovels? Why don't you have earth-moving equipment? And the man from the Communist Party said, well, Professor, you see, this way everyone is employed. And Milton said, well, okay, look, take their shovels away, their robot shovels, and give them teaspoons and carry out the same digging project. Then then the whole Chinese population will have this job. And you'll do one thing, dig a hole. There's a famous essay by Bastiat, the great mid-19th century French liberal, called The Negative Railway, which is the same theme. That if what you think the purpose of an economy is to give employment, then you can get employment really easily by doing incredibly stupid things and not taking advantage of improvements. Then everyone will be employed and everyone will earn $2 or $3 a day. Yes, dear. Have we got a microphone for this young man? What? Yes, it's you. Yep, good. Let's do that first.
I think you established during your presentation that there is a relationship between the liberty, which was responsible for the 3,000% increase, and government. And I think that relationship was inversely proportional.
That's right.
And I think that everyone in this room, well, certainly those of us that have a few gray hairs would say that over the course of the last 50 years or so, government has increased incredibly. We've got
Yes.
70,000 pages of IRS code. We
Yeah.
have countless numbers of government agencies,
Yeah.
and we have a lot of people that seem to think that the government is going to provide all the solutions to their problems.
Yes.
So my question is, with an increase in government over the magnitude that it has increased, and this inverse relationship with liberty, how can you be so optimistic, as you
Yeah.
pointed out at the beginning of your conversation?
Well, that's right. You're absolutely right. And if we keep going down that path of we conservatives used to call it creeping socialism, and my friends on the left were outraged by this, but that's what it is. That's what it is. It's gradually, socialism is attractive partly because families are socialist enterprises, and we all grow up in families. Families are from each according to his ability, to each according to her need. Yeah? I hope your family worked that way. If it didn't, it's not a very nice family. So people think, well, we can apply this family model to the whole world, to a family of 330 million people. And this has never worked out. And this continuous appeal, which you see now in the on the Democratic side, now this is the big D Democratic side in the current preparation for the next election. But you also see it on the look, take Donald Trump, please. He's got an authoritarian streak as wide as the interstate. His is a socialism of the right. My socialist friends, it's socialism of the left, but both are socialism. Both are, mommy and daddy will take care of me. And I urge you all, I don't need to urge most of you, you are, to be free adults. Because free adults is the best plan. It just works out better.
All right, so we'll have one more question. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Hello. A couple facets here. I just want to make sure I get each little point.
Well, you read the books, dear.
I'm
No,
thinking
don't
about
read the
audio
books, buy the
versions.
books.
I admire your optimism
Yeah.
about world prosperity and
Yeah,
growth and richness, and the implication that it requires no slaves and no masters.
it certainly doesn't.
With the exploitation facet of your discussion, I read an article, I can't quote specifics, but China made a deal with a specific African country
Yeah,
that basically they would invest oil infrastructure,
sure,
and China would take 40% of all of the profits.
sure.
that was the deal that was signed.
Well, it was a voluntary deal. What's the problem?
Right. So
Seriously, what's the problem?
my next point is, so people will always be exploited. I'm not sure if you can deny that.
No, I can deny it.
Okay. But in countries, let's say like in Venezuela
Yeah.
or bankless nations in Africa, do you think cryptocurrencies can play a role in increasing the richness of those lower income?
Well, in Venezuela, they use cheap electricity to generate. I'm not quite sure how it works, but you have to use electricity to generate the cryptocurrency. And it's because they have a crazy pricing scheme for the electricity. So no, that's not the way Venezuela should go. Venezuela should stop being socialist. That's what it should do. And stop taking advice from Cuba, which there are about 40 or 50,000 Cubans now helping Venezuela suppress free speech and screw up the price system and ruin the oil industry. But no, I do not think people are exploited when they enter into deals, voluntary deals. It's terrible if your only alternative is working in the shoe factory. You could either break rocks or you can work in the shoe factory. And working at the shoe factory at $1 a day is not very nice, but it's better than only having the option of breaking rocks. And so here's a story. We can end on this. The other Marx, Groucho, who was a great 1930s, 40s movie comedian, also on vaudeville earlier. And Groucho had great success in the 30s in his movies. Night at the Opera, come on, you gotta watch this stuff, it's hilarious. But he had a friend, he had a communist friend, George. And George came to Groucho at the height of Groucho's success and said, Groucho, my good friend, I'm starving, my children are starving, I gotta have a job. You have influence in the movie industry, please get me a job. Now, Groucho's sense of humor was cruel, more or less always. And he said to George, George, I wouldn't want to exploit you, and sent him away. Voluntary trade is not exploitative. It may be crummy, if you don't have skills, if you're not in a very productive economy, you're in bad shape, I agree. But it's not, wage slavery is a senseless phrase. Slavery is slavery. Slavery is that I, the master, use physical violence to make you do what I want you to do. And paying you to do what I want you to do is not the same thing as beating you up. So go forth and don't beat anyone up, and pay people, and enjoy commercially tested betterment. Thank you.